Hello and welcome to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast, your source for news in Hoosier law. Brought to you by Taft. I'm Jordan Morey, your host for this week's episode. Thanks for joining us. A personal note before we dive into today's news, this will be my last episode of the Indiana Lawyer Podcast because my last day with Indiana Lawyer was February 3rd, a few days before this episode airs. I'm leaving for a new career opportunity, but I've enjoyed being your host for the last 15 months. And don't worry, Olivia and Alexa will keep the podcast going, and they'll have new voices for you soon. Until then, let's dive into today's headlines, as well as my interview with Mike Witte, a senior judge and former head of the Disciplinary Commission, who chatted with me about the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Indiana. Today is Wednesday, February 8th, 2023, and these are your headlines. To start us off, here's Indiana Lawyer Editor Olivia Covington with the latest on Magistrate Judge Matthew Brookman's nomination to the Indiana Southern District Court.
On January 25th, Magistrate Judge Matthew Brookman began the confirmation process with his first hearing before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. He's been nominated to the seat on the Indiana Southern District Court that will open up when Judge Richard Young takes senior status. Senator Todd Young introduced Brookman to the committee, noting that members of the Evansville legal community, where Brookman is based, speak highly of the magistrate judge. Young and Indiana Senator Mike Braun, both Republicans, are supporting Brookman's nomination and have turned in their blue slips in his favor. Brookman introduced himself to the committee and briefly shared about his family and his background, but otherwise, he didn't speak much during the hearing. In fact, only one committee question was directed at him specifically. That question came from Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy, who grilled the nominees on the meaning of originalism. Here's what Brookman had to say. You'll hear Brookman speak first, then Kennedy.
My understanding of originalism is the notion that the Constitution has an enduring and a fixed nature, an enduring quality and a fixed nature to it.
What does that mean?
It means that the words matter, and that the words that the framers used to draft the Constitution matter, and that it has a fixed quality to it and has an enduring nature.
Well, how do you determine the fixed quality? Who determines what the words mean? From whose perspective?
Senator, in my time as a magistrate judge, I've not dealt with issues of constitutional interpretation, but my understanding is that you would begin with the language of the Constitution itself.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that.
Carl Tobias is a professor at the University of Richmond School of Law in Virginia and a nationally recognized expert on federal judicial selection. I talked to Carl after the confirmation hearing, and he says the fact that the committee didn't ask many questions of Brookman is a sign that he's a non-controversial nominee. Carl says he expects the committee vote to go in Brookman's favor with bipartisan support. As for when that vote will happen, Tobias guesses it will be sometime this month. Brookman's nomination would then go to the full Senate, which could confirm him in late March or early April. We'll keep an eye out for those votes, so stay tuned.
Thanks, Olivia. Staying in the Indiana Southern District, here's IL reporter Alexa Shrake, who was there on February 1st when the court officially opened its new learning center. Alexa, what can you tell us?
The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Indiana hosted the grand opening of its new Learning Center in the Birch Baugh Federal Building last week. The Federal Court Learning Center has been a to-do list item for 15 years that can now be crossed off. The Learning Center has activity stations and informational handouts that discuss the history and the role of the federal court system. It is geared toward middle and high school students in the hopes of increasing civic education and engagement. Activities like You Be the Juror and You Be the Judge take students through the process of deciding or presiding over a case, providing case details and allowing students to decide if they would act the same way as the judge or jury. Along the walls is historical information about Indiana's federal courts and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. Indiana Southern District Court Chief Judge Tanya Walton-Pratt described the Learning Center as a, quote, happy place before concluding the grand opening with a strike of her gavel. The center is now open to tours and field trips.
Now let's shift gears to the Indiana Northern District Court, where a lawsuit has been filed against the City of Gary Common Council for failing to complete the city's redistricting by December 31st, 2022. Under Indiana Code, redistricting must be completed by the second year after a U.S. Census is completed. In this case, that would mean redistricting following the 2020 census would have been done by 2022. According to the lawsuit, which was filed by attorney and NAACP leader Barbara Bowling Williams, the city of Gary lost 11,000 residents between the 2010 and 2020 censuses. That means that now, without redistricting, the current council districts have a 24 population deviation. The law doesn't require districts to have exactly equal proportions, but according to the lawsuit, courts have held that a deviation of more than 10% could be an equal protection violation. Bowling Williams is asking the federal court for a preliminary injunction and temporary restraining order prohibiting the Lake County Board of Elections and Registration from holding an election until the district lines are redrawn. The Elections Board and its director are also named as defendants in the lawsuit. The courts aren't the only place where redistricting is being addressed. In the Indiana General Assembly, lawmakers are considering House Bill 1116, which includes an amendment that would give Gary and other cities that do not redistrict before January 1st until May 15th to finish their new maps. If the city governments don't meet the May 15th deadline, the Indiana Secretary of State would adopt a new district plan or rectify the existing one. The amended version of House Bill 1116 passed the Elections and Apportionment Committee last month. It's now waiting for a hearing before the Ways and Means Committee. Speaking of legislation, let's throw it back to Alexa for news about a Senate resolution that would restrict the right to bail in Indiana.
Thanks, Jordan. Senate Joint Resolution 1 would deny bail to defendants believed to pose a, quote, substantial risk to the public, regardless of what offense they are charged with. Currently, bail can only be denied for murder or treason. Although the resolution is moving forward, it has received a lot of negative feedback throughout the legislative process. One particularly vocal opponent has been Democratic Senator Rodney Pohl, who proposed 2 amendments that failed. One of Pohl's amendments would have included a list of certain case types that could result in the denial of bail. Here's Pohl speaking about SJR 1.
You essentially have not been able to present any evidence as to whether or not you're innocent of the crime that you're essentially accused of. You could be essentially completely, you could be absolutely innocent of what you're actually accused of. But the court deems, well, you kind of had a little bit of run-in with the law in the past, and you run with some folks that are not the best people, so we deem you a risk. We're going to hold you without bail, meaning that you'll likely lose your job, may lose your kids, you may lose your family. That's a potential result of what this constitutional amendment could do.
But Republican Senator Eric Cook, who authored the resolution, said the measure is about public safety. Here's Cook speaking about the resolution.
Amendment of Article 1, Section 17 of the Indiana Constitution is a necessary first step in this process and in recognizing the primary importance of public safety when it comes to pretrial release decisions.
SJR 1 has cleared the Indiana Senate and has been sent to the House for consideration. It is currently awaiting a committee assignment and hearing. Back to you, Jordan.
Before we wrap up today's headlines, I have a quick update for you on the legal battle over abortion playing out in the Indiana Supreme Court. You may remember that in our last episode, I told you about the Supreme Court oral arguments on the constitutionality of Senate Enrolled Act 1, which is the legislation creating the state's near-total abortion ban. Well, that lawsuit wasn't the only one pending before the High Court. The state was also seeking emergency transfer of a ruling that enjoined SEA 1 as a violation of the state's Religious Freedom Restoration Act. On January 30th, the justices declined to grant emergency transfer to the RFRA case for now, which means the appeal will proceed in the Court of Appeals. We're still waiting on a ruling from the justices in the constitutional case. Stay tuned to the Indiana Lawyer website for the latest updates. Lastly, here's a preview of my very last story for Indiana Lawyer, which you can read in the February 15th issue. After 30 years of talks, Elkhart County is finally creating a consolidated courts campus. For our listeners who haven't been to Elkhart County, there are currently 2 courthouses in the county in Elkhart and Goshen, and they're 11 miles apart. Now, everyone will be in the same place, which I might add will be outfitted with the latest technology. On top of the new digs, Elkhart is currently restructuring its courts into 3 organized divisions: criminal, civil, and family law. As you can imagine, everyone I've spoken with involved is thrilled with the developments. Learn more by reading the next issue of Indiana Lawyer. Okay, that's it for this week's headlines. As always, head over to theindianalawyer.com for the latest legal news. or to learn more about any of the stories we just covered today. Stick around after our sponsor break to hear my conversation with Senior Judge Witte. Thanks for being faithful listeners. Take care.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
For this week's extended interview, we have Senior Judge Mike Witte in studio with us today. Judge Witte, thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Judge Witte is currently the president of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Indiana. As some background, in 1984, Judge Witte was elected as the first Asian American to serve as judge in the state. His 25-year judicial career included service as judge of the Dearborn County Court from 1985 to 2000, judge of the Dearborn Superior Court No. 1 from 2000 to 2008, and judge of the Wayne Superior Court No. 1, 2009. From 2010 to 2021, when he retired, Judge Witte was the executive director of the Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission. Witte has served and led numerous state and national committees, has been a panelist at many national programs on diversifying the judiciary and improving diversity pipelines to a judicial career. He's an Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law grad and continues to provide educational updates at the school. So kind of to begin with, why did you decide to pursue a career in the law, and was it always your intention to be a judge out of law school?
First of all, it wasn't even my intention to be a lawyer when I was an undergrad, and my mom always wanted me to be an architect, and I've got those skills, and my wife and I, we built 2 homes. We were the general contractor. I drew the blueprints myself, so maybe I should have went down that road, but while I was an undergrad at IU Bloomington, that's when I started getting an interest in law. And so that probably developed about my junior year of undergrad, and went to law school from there. And as far as judicial career, no, that wasn't on the horizon, or, it wasn't anything that I had my sights on at all. It was just kind of when an opportunity presents itself, especially a professional opportunity, you don't want to turn it down. And my local bar association, they were at odds with an incumbent judge. And at that time in 1984, the pay for a judge was not very good at all. And nobody in our local bar wanted to run against the incumbent that they were uncomfortable with. So, because their practices were more lucrative than what a judge pay was. So it was, hey, Mike, you're the new guy. You're, going to get a pay raise here if you get elected. The pay for a judge in 1984 was $36,000. Wow. So I ran, and the Bar Association pretty much was behind me. I mean, there were, the incumbent had his supporters too. But that is how I became a judge. It wasn't like I came out of law school and thought, someday I want to be a judge. And so I kind of did my career upside down because I was only 27 years old. And when I say my career's upside down is, most judges become judges towards the middle and end of their careers, or middle of their careers and finish out their careers.
Right.
I did mine on the front end, and, by the time I'd had 24 years in, I was kind of burned out, but things worked out well for me. So
what do you remember about that first year?
Oh, gosh. I can tell you that as I look back on it, boy, was I wet behind the ears. I tried to display as much confidence as I could, knowing that people would come into court and see this kid on the bench, is it Doogie Howser or what? Who is that up there on the bench? And I probably overplayed it a little bit too much myself, to try and validate that a young person could be here. But as I grew into the role and realized, what it takes to be a judge, and all of the education that the at that time, the Indiana Judicial Center, which is now called the Office of Judicial Administration. But the Indiana Judicial Center, the development courses they had, just the continuing education for judges, excellent, and, helped me hone my skills.
Definitely. Being the first Asian judge in Indiana history, what does that mean to you? What did it mean to you then? And what does it mean to you now that you've had, some years to kind of think about that?
The funny thing is when I was elected in 1984, I had no idea that I was the first Asian judge. It didn't come up. And I probably was on the bench, I bet, probably 15 years or so before someone approached me with the question of, who else are Asian judges in Indiana? Was there ever an Asian before you? That's how I found out. I did my own digging and discovered that I was, but it wasn't something that was out there on my resume in 1984 because I had no idea. And what I'm most proud of is that we now have an active Asian American bar here in Indiana. Of course, being in southern Indiana and Lawrenceburg, there weren't any other Asian lawyers down there. In fact, there weren't too many other Asians, period, within the general population. Come up here, and for the Supreme Court, work for them as the head of the Disciplinary Commission, and all of a sudden I'm in a more diverse population pool and a number of, Asian American lawyers here in central Indiana. And we start, associating with each other, and the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, it's called NAPABA. They reached out to Melissa Lynn, who's an Asian American lawyer in Columbus, Indiana, and kind of lit the fire under her to try and get a affiliate of the national organization going here in Indiana. And they reached out and told her, they said, and there's a judge over there that's Asian, and contact him. So Melissa and I and Nick Wong and his sister Kelly, we were the kind of the base that got this started, 10 years ago now, 10 or 11 years ago, we started the association, and we've got about 40 to 50 paid members. So we're still a small organization. We don't have a, professional staff, don't have an executive director. It's all volunteer. But we've made some big strides for our organization and within the local bar.
Why has that topic of diversity been so important to you, especially with the Asian Pacific bar, and just continuing to stay involved? And
Well, as a whole, not just Asian Americans as a minority, but all minorities. As I've spent a career on the bench, and this isn't meant to be a slight at all to my colleagues on the bench, but as I went to those annual judicial conferences and spring and winter conferences, and you notice that there's definitely a lack of diversity throughout the room. And as the discussion or the conversation on diversity, keeps progressing through the 80s and the 90s, and it's okay. Now I recognize, and my experience on the bench, I recognize why the bench needs to look like the society that it is administering justice to. And there are nuances that no matter how much, if you're Caucasian and you think, that you really got a handle on an understanding of Black America or Asian America, Hispanic or Latino, and vice versa, that you're Asian and you identify as white and you think you got a good handle on it, on understanding the Caucasian point, and you don't. There are just nuances of the cultures, and those sometimes present themselves in the courtroom, and you need to be sensitive to it. You need to be aware of it. Just to give an example, I watched a program on diversity in the judiciary recently, and there were 4 panelists and a moderator, and all 5 were white. And they're talking about diversifying the judiciary. If this panel was occurring in 1950, I would understand why that panel was all white. And I would also understand that they are trying to advance diversity out of goodwill, out of understanding, because of what society was like in 1950. And they're progressive and trying to get that message out. But in 2023, when that discussion is about diversifying the bench, we need to diversify the bench, and you see the panel is 4 white people and a white moderator, the optics don't look good. And there's probably some things said during that particular program that I was watching where the people really, in the goodness of their heart, thought they were saying the right things, but probably missed the point completely because they don't have the full understanding.
Has there been some progress in diversity over the years? And, what are some of the barriers that are still prevalent today that maybe, during your time on disciplinary commission or even before that are still existing that need to be addressed better in Indiana?
The one thing I'm not afraid to say at all is that the appointments to the Indiana Supreme Court and the Indiana Court of Appeals over the last 2.5, 3 years have all been appointments of either white males or white females. And Indiana at this point, I believe Judge Rudy Pyle might be the only minority on the appellate bench. I got to think for a minute here. I need a picture book in front of me to verify that. But in any event, the appointments that have occurred for the last 3 years or more, and there's been a number of appointments, have all been white, male, or female appointments. But at the same time, the number of applicants of people of color, people of diverse culture, ethnicity, the pool of applicants has been either non-existent or very small. So it cuts both ways. There needs to be more applicants of people of color and people of diverse backgrounds, and how we stimulate that pool, how we get those folks to come out from behind their desks and apply, because it's an open application process for those positions. We as a profession, and even our affinity bars, so the Marion County Bar Association, the Asian Pacific American Bar of Indiana, organized Latino Hispanic Bar, we need to prop up and promote and groom candidates for those positions. Now, another thing on the appellate side of the appointments is, if you look at a lot of these appointees, they never got the appointment on their first time. Several of the last appointments have been, I think, people who got the appointment on their third try. And that's just the way the process works. Unless someone is really stellar and just, jumps out and gets it on their first try, that is more the exception than the norm. And what we have also seen is when there have been minority applicants and they don't make it to the final 3 for interviews with the governor, when that next opening comes, they don't apply. And so, they end up being one and done, but not one and done like we think about in college basketball or football. It's one and okay, I go back to what I was doing. I didn't get, selected in the draft as a first round draft choice. And so they need to be diligent, nose to the grindstone, and come back again and apply, and come back again and apply. It's not that everything is tilted against the minorities, but the minorities have a role to play too, and they need to step up. Now, one other angle to this whole topic is the Judicial Nominating Commission itself. And it has been primarily a white body for its entire existence. Currently, there is a Hispanic or Latino member of the commission. And I'm pretty sure he is the first minority on the commission since it was created. And I believe the commission was created, I want to say 1972. I might be incorrect on that, but it's somewhere in the early 70s. So again, those people that are in the position of selecting who the final three candidates will be needs to reflect better of the makeup of society. However, you got to have three of those positions are elected by the lawyers across the state. And again, you have to have people of diverse backgrounds step up and run for those positions. If it's all Caucasians running for it, then, that's who gets elected. But it sure would. And then there's three other positions on there, and those three seats are appointed by the governor. So that's one where whoever is the governor, could be a little bit more sensitive to what the makeup of those three gubernatorial appointees looks like.
Switching over to your time on the disciplinary commission, first of all, how did that job come about for you? What was that experience like compared to being a trial court judge?
I will say it was a very good experience, excellent experience. If you do the job of trial judge correctly, especially in rural communities, it is a very, very lonely job. Because if you're doing the job correctly, you are patrolling against ex parte communications all the time. You are avoiding being a part of the Friday night poker gang with, 4 or 5 other lawyers that practice before you all the time. You avoid membership in the local country club because the lawyers are there and you don't want to be in the regular foursome on, Saturday mornings for the golf outings. And so if you do the job knowing to try and avoid all of those appearances to the community, it's not an appearance of impropriety at all, but it's an appearance to the community that, they're out there, they're buddy, things are probably getting fixed up, more cases get settled on the 9th hole than they do, those types of comments are out there in the public. And so when I came to the disciplinary commission, all of a sudden now I'm in a room with lawyers and I actually get to talk to them and don't have to worry about ex parte communication, and all of a sudden I'm in an area where we talk about the law every day. Whereas when I was a judge, I talked about the law every day, but it was in argument in the courtroom where 2 different lawyers are trying to persuade me to a particular decision. And rather than let's sit down over a cup of coffee or let's sit down over a beer and talk about this and, educate me, it's, you're in an adversarial situation in the courtroom. So getting to the commission and actually for the first time in over 25 years, being able to sit down with a group of lawyers and talk the law. And when I have had to make decisions, are we going to open this investigation? Are we going to charge this person? Rather than it being a unilateral decision by me, it was, hey, I got 10 other lawyers on staff here. I can bounce things off. And then we have to take it to a commission. And the commission is a 9-member commission made up of 7 lawyers and 2 laypersons. And so I had 7 more lawyers to talk the law with. So I would say my 11 years at the disciplinary commission, I became a much, much better lawyer overall because I was in an area where I wasn't in a vacuum. I could talk a whole lot more and not worrying about, am I exposing prejudices? Am I saying something that's going to get me a motion for change of venue from the judge or whatever? So that's what was nice about the transition. And the other thing I'll say about it was really a great experience because knowing that 99% of the bar supported what we did and the other 1% of the bar is what kept us employed.
Has the disciplinary process changed at all? And I guess should it, if it hasn't?
It definitely, there were things that we did during my time there that changed our approaches to how we screen cases. There was a huge backlog, enormous backlog when I got there. The backlog of just waiting to get on the agenda of the monthly meeting of the commission was about 3 years. So if something came in today, it would be almost 3 years before the commission looked at it and voted whether or not to bring charges against a lawyer. And that was just uncalled for, absolutely uncalled for, but it existed. And rather than just throw more resources at that backlog, it was, hey, let's step back and let's think about how we process our cases here, and what can we do to expedite that. And we were able to knock out that backlog. We were able to keep it so that we had at any time in the queue, maybe 35 to 40 cases at a time in the queue, working its way through investigation, because that backlog was over 300 cases with investigations or waiting to be investigated. And we were able to work that down to a process where if the number got up to 50 in the queue, then, okay, it's time for, that's red lights and sirens going. And when we finally, when I left, I know that we maybe only had 2 or 3 months out of the probably 8 years that we operated under our new and improved, where we hit that 50 number. And I remember one of the times we hit that 50 number is because it was one lawyer and he had like 17 different complaints against him. So that was an artificial inflation.
Sure. Going back to Asian Pacific American Bar Association, I guess, why is it important to have this bar association? You kind of mentioned it earlier a little bit moving forward, but what kind of opportunities does it offer to its members?
What it offers to its members is the opportunity to engage with other people that have had similar experiences in life, in growing up. It also opens the door, gives those lawyers another avenue to become a part of the broader bar across the state. We get inquiries from time to time where someone is looking particularly for an Asian American lawyer because the litigation is one that somehow has some sort of Asian connection or overtones to it. A lot of times those types of requests are coming either from the East Coast or the West Coast, but it's, litigation that's going to happen in Indiana. And so the West Coast lawyer or the East Coast lawyers are Asian and they're wanting to find an Asian lawyer in Indiana to be co-counsel. So those are the advantage. And Asian industry is huge in Indiana. If we were sitting here doing an IBJ instead of Indiana lawyer and talking about Asian business, I think Indiana is still the only state that has all 3 major Japanese automakers have a footprint. So we got Honda, Toyota, and Subaru all have manufacturing facilities here. And I don't think there's any other state in the United States that has all 3 within its boundaries. And then you've got all the satellite industries that go with that. Our Governor Daniels, Governor Pence, Governor Holcomb, all have had initiatives and trade visits to Asia.
And just so not just that, I remember I used to work down in Seymour, and the mayor of Seymour would go to Japan because Eisen, I think it's Eisen is down there, but a big manufacturing facility with Japanese connections.
Mm-hmm.
So, think of small town Seymour, Indiana, and the mayor is going to Japan for business deals. I mean, that's pretty significant.
Yeah. If it was Lawrenceburg, it was, okay, I'm going to Las Vegas to negotiate with some gambling people.
Yeah.
But no, you're exactly right. You have those connections, and, I wouldn't be surprised if the mayor of Greensburg has done that, or the mayor of Lafayette, probably, so those opportunities come up. I can tell you another avenue we've had several times is in divorce situations. And husband and wife are both of Asian heritage, and they're going to get divorced, and one or both want a lawyer that has Asian culture understanding representing them in the divorce process. So, and when we talk Asian, I'm not talking just East Asian, because Asia also includes India and Pakistan. And, we have significant membership within our organization from South Asia as well as East Asia and Central Asia, which is China.
What is something you would like lawyers to know about the Bar Association and or yourself?
About the Asian Pacific Bar Association?
Yes.
Or
yes.
I'll give plugs.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. In November of 2023, Indianapolis will be the host of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association annual convention. So NAPABA is bringing its convention here, and we would sure like for the Indiana business community to roll out the red carpet and welcome the attendees to this convention. The annual convention brings in about 2,500 lawyers. And also for lawyers that are looking for some CLE, we're going to have a program on May 4th and watching the Indiana Lawyer, because I'll be getting some promo materials out there to Olivia or someone to promote this program. But we're going to have Karen Korematsu as a speaker, and also show a film called And Then They Came for Us. The film is about internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, narrated by George Takei, also known as Mr. Zulu in Star Trek. And then Karen is the daughter of Fred Korematsu. And Fred Korematsu is the Japanese American U.S. citizen who defied the internment of Japanese Americans and challenged it, was convicted of a crime for failing to report to an internment camp, took it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court did not rule in Fred's favor, and said because, there's an exception because of wartime and national security, that it was okay to deny freedom, deny due process of law to the Japanese Americans for the internment after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So Fred is Karen's father, and Karen goes around and does promotions on educating and advancing civil liberties and making sure that it doesn't happen again. And the Fred Korematsu Institute was very instrumental and had a part in, after 9/11, stepping up and as well as NAPABA did too, of, don't go down this road again and just say, okay, we need to start rounding up everybody that is Muslim and put them in a detainment area. First of all, how do you determine what is Muslim? People don't look Muslim because Muslim's a religion. Muslim is not a physical appearance. But nevertheless, we went through that scare in 2001, and NAPABA and Korematsu Institute are out there, hey, put the brakes on. And President Bush at the time did put the brakes on, said, hey, folks, stop, wait a minute, let's rethink this. So that's what I want to get out there. We're going to have Karen May 4th watching the Indiana Lawyer for the details of that. And hopefully, if you have the opportunity to come by the JW Marriott the second weekend in November for the national convention, and register, I know they will have some excellent speakers, top-notch continuing education.
The national convention, I guess, how many states have Asian Pacific Bar Associations? How does that kind of work? Where is everyone coming from?
NAPABA, the national organization, is headquartered in Washington, D.C., but has membership across the United States as well as outside U.S. jurisdiction. I don't know the exact total membership of the organization, but as far as affiliates of the national organization, we're the only one in Indiana. There's also here amongst our neighbors, there's one in Columbus, Ohio, one in Cincinnati, one in Chicago, Minneapolis, I think St. Louis. Flyover territory, not as much, in the Dakotas or Denver definitely has, and Salt Lake also has affiliates. But then you get to the California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and a number of organizations there, a number of affiliates, I should say, and likewise on the East Coast. And I know that about 1/3 of the entire membership of the organization, national organization, is from California.
That'll do it for this week's episode. Thanks so much to Senior Judge Mike Witte for joining us on this week's pod. To catch up on previous episodes of the Indiana Lawyer podcast, visit theindianalawyer.com or your favorite streaming service.